Hi, very good afternoon to you. It's Jim from maverickstar Ops. Guys, wanted to talk about a few different things in this video for you. Before I do, very big thank you to JBM. Thanks for your message as well, and it's great to know that somebody has your back. And you know, a bit later on, I suppose we'll just encourage a few people if they want to support to what we do here at the maverickstar Observatory. The link is down there in the description. So, you know, it almost feels, doesn't it, like we're living in very surreal times, especially when we watch some of the videos and films that, you know, has came out of Hollywood recently with regards to end times, like Armageddon, The Knowing, 2012. There's a common theme that seems to run through these films, which we are starting to begin to see from the behaviour of governments and people, obviously, who have a lot of influence because of their wealth. And what I'm particularly talking about is what we have witnessed firsthand over the last 2 weeks here at the observatory. First of all, I've seen some of the comments saying that you seem to be very bitter about losing your advert revenue. Well, I've explained it's not a lot of money, but the principle is more meaning than the money itself. You know, what we're seeing, and it shouldn't just anger me, it should anger you as well, because what we're seeing is nothing short of a cover-up to something much bigger. We're watching the world elites and world governments try and raise £100 trillion. What they intend to do with that is beyond me. You know, I've showed you recent charts where you can see there's nothing you can do about CO2 in the atmosphere. You can't, you know, do a better job than what Mother Nature does already. And if you understand that fact, then you know that it took the last 100,000 years to reduce just 100 parts per million of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So what they intend to do with all the money in the world doesn't really matter. It's going to be pointless. You know, the reality of this is, and I hope that this does bring it home to a few of you that have been watching some of the recent videos. If you're new to this video, you're going to think, wow, is this even real? Or if you're starting to get those feelings, you're new to this sort of channel and what we talk about here, do a bit of research, and I've given you some excellent pointers where to begin with. Start with interglacial and glacial periods, because that really is the pinnacle of what we're about to face, as well as what we're going to face with another anomaly, which is equally as rare, in fact even rarer than glacial periods, because the last time we went through a glacial period was between 10 and 15,000 years ago, which we came out of quite naturally through, you know, a natural warming. Nature doing her work as she does brings us out of these glacial periods for around about 12,000 years or so, and then we go back into them. But the glacial periods last a lot longer. And you know, we've really only been in the business of technological advancement for the last 2.5 years. Let's be generous, okay? We started creating steam engines around 250-300 years ago, so we've not been that in the business of being a technological advanced species, although we have been a little bit more intelligent than all the other animal species on the planet for quite some time. And that was what separated, you know, human beings from animals. It was not the fact that we're not a different animal from them, we're just a more intelligent one. So, you know, what we're seeing is a cover-up to something really big, and I think what we've discussed over the last few weeks here has been mainly focused on what is coming from mainstream media, mainstream governments. That is, you know, CO2 is causing climate change, and man is responsible for emitting that CO2, which we have showed to be complete nonsense in those videos. But there is a more important I think, agenda, which is, I think, is being covered up. And what that is that they are trying to cover up the fact that these processes are quite natural, and more importantly, where we're heading at the moment, we've crossed the line, is back into another glacial period. I pose the question, you know, because of what we've seen happen over the Arctic Circle this year, over the Northern Hemisphere, is this the return then of the glacial period as it started already in 2021? Because what we've seen is 2 million square miles, which is an absolutely enormous increase in ice over the Arctic Circle right now, and we don't know if this is the end of it. You know, we could be going further and further afield into it, and you know, it would seem natural with what weather patterns we're getting now would be a run up to that. What I'm talking about is, first of all, you would expect more rain, because it is not like they say, it is more the case that when things go cooler, that things start to fall out of the sky, and we're talking about precipitation, rain, H2O, and you're going to get more of that if things start to get colder, and as soon as those tropical jet streams bring up that warm moist air into those northern latitudes, probably over around 50 degrees latitude, then you're going to get precipitation take place. But if we are merging, and we clearly see that we are merging into another glacial period, then we can expect that rain at some point to turn into sleet and snow, and then, you know, it might not, we might not get summers like we've been used to. We could see a prolonged ice build-up over a long duration of time, and that is exactly how this world has gone about its business for many hundred thousands of years. If you look at the charts that I've, you know, presented to you over the last month, you'll see that that is not uncommon. What is uncommon is our attitude to this. Now, I've been using, not as a scapegoat, but as a principle, Canada, because Canada was only recently inhabited by a lot of people, and what they've done there is exactly what an individual would do by building on a floodplain, knowing that it's not flooded for 100 years, but you thought it was safe now to do it because it's never going to happen again, and then all of a sudden it does flood. And it's the same principle for Canada. What they've done is established, you know, a settlement there, and they have allowed more people to settle there, and it's created a country and lots of cities. And of course we know that, you know, if we're going to go back into a glacial period, that cities are going to fail straight away. Now at the moment we're just seeing rain. It's going to change. You know, you don't need a crystal ball, you don't need to be a prophet. It is going to change, and it's going to change for the same reason it has done this, you know, hundreds of times before. We've made the mistake by colonising continents that were inhabitable for prolonged periods of time, and they're going to become uninhabitable again. There is no way we can sustain cities in those environments when the climate goes, you know, so cold that, you know, ice starts to build up, glaciers start to, you know, move, because it will just, like a steamroller, flatten those cities, and in years to come there will be nothing left to recognise that there was even a city there, even after the glaciers melt, perhaps in another 80,000 years. Now, as we have seen, and I mentioned earlier, in the films, every time there was a known catastrophe coming, there was always a massive effort to cover it up. And, you know, it would have been, in these films, not known till the very last minute that this was happening. Now, we know that 98% of the world's population aren't aware of the magnetic North Pole migrating at the moment. They're not aware of where we are in relationship to returning to another glacial period. So what we're talking about is legitimately billions of people having to find another way to make things work for them. And if cities go offline, that means your job goes offline. I don't know how long your employers are going to pay you not to work, but you need to start thinking about these things. What is your property going to be worth if you're in a vulnerable position regarding its location? and you're getting given really some information which is very rare and not being widely spoken about, and for good reasons, scientific reasons. The science says that we are returning to a glacial period, and we know that in the history of, just say, Canada, and as well as all those other northerly territories in Europe and Russia, we know that largely they was uninhabited 300, 400 years ago. And the reason for that was because the temperature went negative. If we just concentrate on some of the recently historical information that we've got, we knew that the Vikings arrived on Greenland, but it was only after 100 years that they had to leave because the temperature went so negative for them. The climate dissatisfied them being able to grow grains and stuff like that, not just for themselves but for the cattle. The only people that have lived in these territories for that long are Inuits and Eskimos and other people like that have adapted to an extreme climate condition. So if you're planning on staying in these regions, you've got probably a couple of options to think about, because we are all going to see this happen, and it's going to happen in our lifetimes. I guarantee you that. We're going to watch cities have to be mass evacuated because they can no longer sustain an environment where the majority of the human beings in these cities are going to be able to thrive, let alone even survive. It will be too hard. Think about the way the Inuits and the Eskimos lived. It was mainly off what they could catch from the oceans. That was frozen majority of the time. So they would do ice core holes in the lakes, in the sea, that was frozen ice, or they would catch things like walruses, seals, and other fish, and that was the staple of their diet because they had no environment to grow crops like we have today. And we're just seeing a little trial run, if you want to think about it like that, what's happened in Canada just over the last week, with the torrential rain washing away the foundations to the point where it's created almost a canyon under the railway lines, and the only thing that is going across there is two lines where the tracks are, which would not support the train travelling over them for obvious reasons. But the point is this, is that those railway lines can't be put back together and usable within a foreseeable near future. Think about it. Engineers first of all need to assess what needs to be done, then those plans have to go to a manufacturer of bridges. That will take months, and then it has to be installed. That will take months. The damage that has been caused in Canada right now is going to take probably 6 to 7 months to put right. But what this has done is shut off one of the most important ports for Canada, which is the Vancouver port, I believe. And as a result of that, you are going to notice, if you're living in Canada already, shortages in the shops, because Vancouver port imports billions and billions of pounds worth of produce every year. So those staples that you used to get in all around the world are sitting there right now at the port. They can't leave by rail because the railway lines are unusable, and there are some roads also unusable, so they can't leave by truck. Now, this is just one event which is going to reoccur, and not just reoccur over in Canada. It's going to be seen in the United States, like we saw last year with Texas freezing and 100 million people being affected by those sub-zero temperatures, which took out literally the power grid. And as well as I do, that when things affect the power grid, it affects everything else in like a chain of order. Pumping stations can't pump fuel, and if they can't pump fuel, then how do logistics operate? How do people get to and from work? What I'm saying is that the governments haven't got no contingency plans even put in place for any of this, and they certainly haven't put any contingency plans to protect the infrastructure that keeps a city sustaining the amount of people which it does at the moment. So here you have Einstein, And I understand what it's like with you guys that are trying to tell other people about this and they just simply won't listen. Well, I'll just say, just don't waste your time. If they are in the business of, having an open mind and they are prepared to listen, please inform them. If they're not, then they are going to go down with many millions of people. And like I say, you have hindsight right now. If you're living in one of these territories, which is about 40 degrees north, you're going to find if you live in those regions above 40 degrees north latitude, then you've got the hindsight of what you want to do now. What I can say is that it's definitely coming. Science is showing us that. This isn't me making predictions based on a hunch. This is based on scientific evidence that supports it. It's happened before. There's no reason why it won't happen again. If you're one of these people that want to risk everything you've worked for the whole of your life, on a hunch that you might have this might not happen, then please, do what you feel you must to protect your loved ones and yourself, financially as well as other ways. But at least you've heard the science behind it. That's the main thing. And I keep saying this, we have seen the way they are trying to cover up things now with relationship to alternative views on climate change. And you've got to ask yourself the question, why are we even listening to them dictate to us now what it is actually causing climate when they are a million miles away from the real reasons? It's nothing to do with global warming. We've heard Al Gore, and we've given him his Nobel Peace Prize when he told us that in 14 years there would be no ice over the northern hemisphere. Well, there is ice over the northern hemisphere. It rebounded back in the last 12 months by an extra 2 million square kilometres. So it just shows you how wrong he is. And I've presented evidence which rebuts the claim that they're making that CO2 is causing climate change, because it's got nothing at all to do with CO2. So there is something else that they must know is taking place. And any decent scientist that has studied the history of our climate should know, or have a good reason to suspect what that is. It's got to be, first of all, the fact that we're returning back into a glacial period, and secondly, that we are facing an even more rarer event which is harming the climate right now, which is setting up these events like we're seeing these flash floods, and that is the geomagnetic poles reversing on this planet. What we do here at the observatory is monitor the geomagnetic North Pole every 3 seconds with bespoke equipment, and we are monitoring the intensities at different locations around this world with magnetometers, and we put all that information up onto the website poleshiftnews.com. If you want to go over there, you can see our archive, which is a rare thing to see on science website, because usually they show you just the recent events. Well, we keep an archive so that you can see what is going on, not just with the geomagnetic North Pole migrating, not just with information relating to CO2 and climate change, but also a lot of other anomalies that might concern people, such as the active volcanoes in eruption right now around the world on a regular basis, or the largest magnitude earthquake that has happened in the last 24 hours of when we do an Earth Alpha at a glance upload onto YouTube, and also update our website with that information. And we cover a lot of other things as well, like CO2 in the atmosphere. We've got the equipment to do that, and we try and monitor all these things and record them, and using the scientific method relay that back to you guys so that it keeps you informed. But there are going to be a lot of things that we are going to need to discuss over the weeks to come, and we are moving ever more closer to that 40-degree mark over the northern hemisphere of total pole migration, where we could see the magnetic North Pole leave the strong field lines and move into the weak field lines, and therefore we get a faster migrating pole which, you know, is obviously, if anything is to go by how we've seen the weather change on our planet over the last 30 years, which is when it stepped up a gear. We're also recently seeing over the last 5-6 months a 20% increase in speed, which has not even been mentioned by mainstream organisations such as NASA, the European Space Agency, or NOAA, or any other, such as the British Geological Survey or the Canadian Geological Survey. None of them have mentioned it. And again, you have to ask questions why it is. Why can't we get, even me, over level 2 clearance on the swarm data mission and, you know, the data that they've collected? Why can't even the people that work on that mission get that data? Why does some people have to collect it and then send it off to be analysed? It just doesn't sound the best way of doing things. What it does is it does open suspicion up. Could they be doing something with the data, showing people something? If they do show it, could they be showing them something completely entirely different? Well, you know, when they behave like this, you have to ask that question. But one thing is that we are starting to see, you know, them come down heavy on people that are talking about these subjects and not in line with the way they want them to talk about them. And you've seen that happen directly here on this channel, and you've seen it happen on a few other channels as well. You know, they went out with a blanket and just said anyone else talks with an alternative opinion as to what has caused climate change, or what is or even if climate change is happening, will be losing their, you know, advert revenue from Google. My question is, who's given Google that authority to infringe on basic human rights? And, you know, I want to just ask you to think about it. How much of a serious issue is it if they are prepared to look, even themselves, like Nazis were behaving during the beginning of the Second World War? If they're even prepared to go to those levels, then what does that tell you about what is going on right now? It should, in the least, make you think that this is just not a small issue. This is something very big taking place, and a returning to a glacial period on the back of a geomagnetic reversal is something you probably would try and cover up as much as you could, because there is nothing that a government anywhere on this world can do to keep any of these cities over that 40-degree latitude line running as normal. Think about it. Guys, there's a link down there if you want to help support what we do here at the observatory. It is more than just talk and cherry pick, you know, news articles. We actually go and collect the data, and we use the scientific method in doing that. And you know, big thank you if you are one of our supporters as well. And there's, like I say, a link down there if you want to help support us. We'll be back in a couple of days, maybe with an Earth Health update and a return to the topic of this subject that we're discussing at the moment. As always, bye for now.